That's Brian Christopherson, Husker247. BC, let's move on to some Nebraska stuff here. Starting with Nebraska basketball, like obviously things not going super well right now. Where is your, I don't know if panic meter is the right word, but like where are you at right now in terms of how concerned you are about the rest of the season?
Um, yeah, I don't know if it's panic, but it's disappointment. It's thinking about how 3 weeks ago, like 25 minutes into the game at Iowa City, I saw some of the deficiencies in this team, but at the moment you're like, you know what? They are buying into this gritty, grimy thing, and you're seeing it here in this game, and finish this thing off, and they're on the path. You're seeing them like at that point as like an 8 seed kind of team, and then it's sort of slowly has slipped away where now you're like, can they make the top 15? They got some work to do to be in the Big Ten tournament, and so from that standpoint it's disappointing because for all their faults, you still have, your seniors and Brice Williams and Juwan Gary, and that's a lot of guys who have played a lot of basketball. And you were kind of hoping that they would have that ingredient, kind of we were just talking about, that the great teams have to win those close games, but they just haven't had it, and it feels like right now they're kind of searching for answers. You saw the lineup switch with the starters at the beginning of the game at Wisconsin, and it wasn't just because of that, but it's 19-2, 5 minutes in with that lineup, and I don't know, whatever their move they're trying to make right now, it just isn't quite connecting.
When you're talking about working within the confines of like the way the roster's constructed, if you want to control the controllables, what do you think Nebraska should accentuate to give themselves a chance to get out of this?
I think that's where it's a tough question because at some point we could really simplify it. It's like you got to have some shooters with the confidence to put it in when they're open, and I don't sense they have like really I don't know, like third or fourth options that you can bank on in those situations. I mean, their point guards, for instance, are trying hard and trying to excel at what they do well, but you can watch like Raleigh Wooster, and he can drive it and get in the paint, get within 5 feet of the bucket, but it's not a place he feels comfortable finishing. And then you have guys who we all kind of hope the hope, I think, that like Berkay or Andrew Morgan would kind of develop like that consistent outside shot, or at least enough of a threat to space the floor more, and that really hasn't been there. So you ask that question, and it's hard to answer because I don't know who that specific guy is, aside from saying, well, Connor Ethezian needs to just start going off and make 6 or 7 threes as compared to 2 or 3, like we're in the sort of that state where I don't think it's as simple as just naming that guy or this guy, but I do think, Brice, I think is going to have to maybe attack even more than he has the last couple of weeks. He's had the numbers, but it has felt like at times it's been a little more passive than you would think from him. And so, maybe that's one place you start, but I think it's got to be with him and Gary, sort of like, this is the expectations. We're going this hard, and hopefully other guys follow. But there's not an easy way out right now.
BC, is it too late not in the season, but in kind of the time for Hoiberg at Nebraska to reevaluate how he puts these rosters together?
Yeah, I'm sure they'll have to do a deep search after this season if it continues to not be what they want, about where in particular they missed. And then I think you have to study where other teams have really, really found it this past year, because it's evolving year after year. I want to be careful with it though, because like I think the last few years I've gone on the radio and kind of praised how he's put it together with veterans, and it like,
I agree.
So I don't want to like be knee jerk right now in this skid and act like they've completely flopped there. It's sort of, I realize it's a win or else business, and right now it's or else. But I liked last year's roster I put together, and I really believe they thought going into this season the parts when they put them on the board, they liked how the puzzle was going to look, but maybe some of those parts just haven't quite elevated to what they thought they were going to be in certain areas on the floor. Like we don't talk about even like a Gavin Griffiths, but I think there was a hope like he was going to take off and at least be in a rotation, maybe off the bench or something and knock in a couple threes. And, that hasn't been there. And so you could probably go through like 3 or 4 parts of guys they added that we could have talked ourselves into as recently as a few weeks ago. And right now we don't feel like having that conversation. So that's where it's tough to just take a bat to the pinata right now. But I do think they're going to have to look hard at where do we think we didn't quite get it right with this group and what has to change.
So, BC, the reason I asked that is I agree with you. The last few years, I thought the roster construction.
It's a fair question. It's a fair question, Ravi. I just think it's hard to answer, because they have had some that I've liked what they've put together. But, yeah.
For sure. And in the last few years, I agree with you. I think the roster construction has been much more coherent than it was the first couple. I guess I wonder, with where Nebraska's at kind of in the college basketball pecking order, is there a kind of hard limit on what they can accomplish, sort of trying to retool and rebuild the team every year the way it seems like they have been?
Well, I mean, there is that hope always that you can have this nucleus that comes up through your system and you're attaching to that with the portals, and you're not so dependent on the portal. But there's that part of me that also doesn't know how realistic that is anymore. If you can accomplish that or not, I'd love to see it happen. I'd love it if you could find this group of like 3 or 4 guys that sort of grows up through your system, and you can stick with them and have patience while you're adding these senior parts around them. But I don't know if you can do it or not. It would be an interesting study. I think there's probably been some frustration, and I'm happy for the guys who have succeeded, but not only has Nebraska had this 6-game losing skid, but you've had it where guys like St. Thomas and John Tajay have had big games against Nebraska. And so there's no doubt that like sort of puts it in bold-face writing too, like how bad this has felt, So I think that part probably hurts too. And so, I know they've tried to continue to grow the brand locally, but those are some guys who have happened to really take off here lately that are doing well, that are homegrown kids. And so that probably adds to the frustration of folks.
Yeah, and I get it. And I think we got to be able to move on from that unless we say it a different way, right? It's like we can look at Saint and Dawson and Trout and Green, and we watch Salas and Chucky go at it last night. You mentioned Tanjay, Fiddler's playing for a top team in the country. Where we get to the point where you can say, okay, yeah, I see why they're doing X, Y, and Z. And it's not an indictment of Nebraska as long as we're having the conversation about Nebraska on why, like what they need to do within the confines of what they have. So I say that's, you know what I mean?
I agree with you totally, Damon. I'm not really one to get into the whole thing about actually where they came from and all that, but I bring that up because I know that like when things are going bad, that always gets thrown on the pile too, right? I mean, it's just part of it. When like some local guys are doing well elsewhere, no matter what the circumstances were, and there's sometimes good reasons, and both parties want to be involved with each other too. But I agree with you. It's about what they got to do right now over there is like, you're just looking at yourself. Like, where is this missing? Where was it more successful a year ago that have kind of flailed at?
Like what was I doing when we were getting to the 71 win percentage from March of 2023 until this 6-game skid, right? Because he's clearly proven he's a good coach.
Well, he's not one to make knee-jerk reactions, that's for sure. Because I think Hoiberg also looks at the 6-game skid and he thinks like, if we had 2 of those 4 games, this would be the conversation we thought we'd be having about this team. 2 of those 4 close games they lost. And those were games they were able to win, and they had something special sort of in those clutch moments. It actually does kind of connect to how we started this conversation. I mean, last year's team during their run, which everyone kind of got caught up in, they would have these moments where Rink would go off for 30 one game, but then Wiltshire would come over here and he'd have 24 another game. And there was always somebody who hit a clutch shot when it was like a 2-point game that gave Nebraska a 5-point lead with 2 minutes left at PBA. And they just sort of had that magic, but I think it was more than magic. It was they just had more options to go to offensively. And so that's where it just hasn't hit this year. There's not as many guys, I think, capable in those moments or confident right now in their shot to put in the hole, like when you have to have it. And that was different with them a year ago. So you gotta have to look at what you got to do to change the roster in that aspect at a few spots probably.